really social selling for me is how do you become friends? How do you build a relationship with your potential prospects? And I do think Power Questions helps that process. I think, of course, asking questions of anyone creates a relationship and creates that more of a social connection.
Welcome to the Making Sales Social podcast, featuring the top voices in sales, marketing, and business. Join Bryn Tillman and me, Bob Woods, as we each bring you the best tips and strategies our guests are teaching their clients, so you can leverage them for your own virtual and social selling. Enjoy the show. Lisa Scotto, the founder of LMS Group Coaching, a sales strategy and business development consulting firm, joins us today in the Social Sales Link virtual studios for this episode of Making Sales Social. Lisa's company focuses on creating end-to-end B2B sales strategy, making her a perfect fit for our show. Specifics of what Lisa does include pipeline development, presentation blueprints, and refining what your company already has going for it to help it build revenue. All great goals to have. We're also going to be talking a lot about power questions, which, I mean, I'm the one who usually asks questions here, but I always enjoy hearing about power questions, especially when it comes to sales. And we're going to be getting a lot into that. We're also going to touch a little bit on her approach of sales being a discipline, and that good salespeople just don't sell, they add value. That's something we emphasize here on Making Sales Social and at Social Sales Link. So I'm definitely looking forward to that and hope you are too. So with that, Lisa, welcome to Making Sales Social.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. Happy to be here.
Good. Always happy to hear that. So our first traditional question is, what does making sales social mean to you?
I love that question for so many reasons, because I think it really is about creating relationships with your potential clients and prospects. And often I think that is missed with salespeople. They just want to get right into the sale, right? Like, let me tell them everything I know about my product or service. And I think really social selling for me is how do you become friends? How do you build a relationship with your potential prospects? And I do think Power Questions helps that process. I think, of course, asking questions of anyone creates a relationship and creates that more of a social connection. So I'm a firm believer in relationship-based selling and figuring out how to bring that to whatever it is that you are selling in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Yeah, sales. I mean, once upon a time, sales was transactional long time ago. And thank God it's not anymore, because it's really, I mean, quite frankly, it's actually fun, believe it or not, to get to know other people out there who may be doing different things and, helping them out through the products and services that we sell.
Right. And I think really, if you're adding value to the conversation or to the relationship, then it becomes not salesy. It becomes, how am I adding value? Right. And I think that should be the question any salesperson should be asking before they're even reaching out to any prospects, is how can I add value to this specific conversation, to this specific prospect, to this specific client? And I think the best salespeople sometimes walk away from sales, right? Which is so counterintuitive. But if you're truly sort of grounded in how am I adding value, which is something I've sort of been my North Star from a sales perspective, then I feel like that really sheds light on, well, in some situations, you may not be adding value and you may have to walk away from that. So
yeah, because there are situations where it's kind of like, it's a difference between being of service, but trying to like jam things in at the same time, and then being of true service, which is what you mentioned, which is like sometimes, hey, this ain't it for us, but do you know of someone who can, who might be able to use my product or service or whatever. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think too, as I've learned being a consultant now, which you don't necessarily always have this opportunity if you're selling a product, but I like to give a lot away for free, right? How can I add value even in that first initial conversation? What are the top 3 things that my potential prospect might leave the conversation with that, maybe you might want to gate at some point, but as part of building that relationship, you sort of are giving in the hopes that that will come back to you at some point. And I think that that's also a great skill to cultivate as a salesperson, is how are you within each interaction giving away something, whether it's knowledge, a contact, a relationship, an article that you thought of for the client, right? How are you continuing to foster that versus just reaching out and asking for something, right? So I think it does have to be sort of this giving state in order for you not to come off as too salesy or too pushy.
Right. Right. Yeah, it definitely gets to one of my favorite quotes, which is stop talking about how you help people and just help people.
I love that. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really like a quote that's predominantly featured at your website. It's a quote by Blair Singer. And the quote is, "The person who asks the questions is always the one who is in control of the situation." It's powerful and it's true, which gets us into the concept of power questions. So what the heck are power questions?
Great question, Bob. Thanks for asking.
That was funny.
Power questions are really the thought of how you're asking questions of your prospects. So as part of the sales process, any good salesperson knows that they should be asking their client lots of questions. When I think of power questions, it's actually tweaking how we're asking them so that we're extracting as a lot of information from the prospect or the client. And I think often in this sort of, you got the meeting, you set up a meeting with a client, you're on the phone, and you really just want to impart all of your knowledge. Taking a step back and really thinking about, actually, I'm going to speak less and ask more. In fact, I would tell my teams when I was in corporate, the majority of the call should be them speaking, not you speaking. And if it's in reverse and you're speaking for the majority of the call, that is not a good sales call. And you really should think about how to reverse that. So a power question for me is always something that I prep before a prospect call. So I'm doing a ton of research, as any good salesperson should be doing ahead of a phone call. And you should be doing research not just on the company or the person, but also the industry at large, as well as just macroeconomic trends, right? Like anything that might be important to that conversation. And I typically craft about 3 or 4 questions ahead of that call even. Now, in the middle of the call, you might sort of be inspired, or that the client or prospect might say something where you need to tweak or you need to sort of riff on maybe a question that you've come up with. But really thinking about not just the questions, but how you're asking them in that conversation is important. And as I coach and consult with various different companies, often they intuitively know, right, that they should be asking questions, but they're not sort of honing in on things like, tell me more about that, or how did you do that, or how did that marketing campaign work for you, how did it perform, right? They're asking, oh, I saw that marketing campaign, did it go well? Which is a yes or no question, right? That's a very black and white answer, instead of tell me how it performed. Well, that's going to open up a lot more of a conversation, especially if you're, let's say, an advertising agency, right, and you're trying to get that marketer's business.
Right.
So really, power questions is how you ask questions and ensuring that you're prepared with those questions ahead of any sort of prospect or client phone call.
Yeah, that's that's something that's really powerful too. So how can they be effective not only in just B2B sales, but because we love talking about social selling here, when it comes to social selling, I mean, hopefully when it comes to how we do social selling, which is like education prior to them even contacting you through mainly LinkedIn, hopefully they have some idea of what it is we do, and hopefully we've been able to speak to them through the information that we've already provided. I guess loop power questions in at that point, so that a salesperson who does social selling can kind of take things to the next level while being of value and while helping.
Well, I think it's important, even like from a social standpoint for outreach, there could be questions peppered in there that really get the attention of a potential prospect, right? So instead of just crafting an email that's sort of a verbatim of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to think, you can pepper in questions in a power question format that maybe might intrigue someone, or maybe might even get them willing to take that first step with you, right? Willing to take that first phone call or meeting with you. So I think you could even back it up a bit and have it be a part of that sort of discipline of reaching out to people. I often pepper my outreach with those types of questions to try and elicit a response, right? I think we all have to get very creative, especially when you're reaching out through LinkedIn or if you're doing it completely cold. And I think doing your research and asking those questions really will set you apart from the emails that are just what I like to call, just somebody
Yeah.
throwing
Cool.
up on their client, right? An
Right.
email,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You had mentioned something that I'd like to get into a little bit more. Power question framing or formatting or whatever. I guess this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about specific power questions and maybe an example or two of what exactly a power question is and why it's phrased like that to get the type of responses that you want to, and showing value and things like that at the same time.
Yeah, so early in my career, I've been selling for more years than I'd like to say, over 25 years. And early in my career, I learned about this concept of power questions and selling, and really tried to figure out how to put it into practice. And I had a client back in the day where I actually went and made physical sales calls. So this is going way back. And the client was unhappy with, so they were already a client. They were unhappy with a policy change that the company I worked for made. And every time I made a sales call, would bring up this policy change and would really beat me down around the policy change that I had no control over, right? So I remember thinking to myself, I've got to come up with a power question that I can ask this person so that they kind of get off my back with this new policy change. So next time I went in, I was prepared. I went in and I said, how many clients, because they were selling on behalf of my organization, how many clients have you lost because of the new policy change? Silence.
Yeah.
Any clients because of the new policy change. In fact, I went on to be the highest grossing salesperson that year for that specific product for the Walt Disney Company. And it really wasn't until I framed the question in that way that he also realized, actually, I'm making this a problem. It's not a problem, right? Like, this is not a problem. So that's like a good an example of it in an account executive sort of way, right? An account manager. I was maintaining a relationship with this client. I think in a prospecting meeting, what's important is you're trying to get the prospect to storytell to you, because then what you've asked them then helps you formulate your story back, right? It helps you sort of craft why your product or service is a good fit for them. So often what I will ask clients is, tell me more about your process. So tell me is a good statement to use. It's actually not a question, which is funny. Tell me more, right?
Yeah.
Getting them to talk about anything. You can ask that of anything, no matter what your product or service is. Using how and why questions, right? How did that perform, as I mentioned earlier? Or how do you view the organization now versus a year from now, right? Or why did something work versus why did something not work? Why did you get on the phone with me, right? That's going to tell you a ton of information, right? So I think those three sort of tell me more, why, and how are really good, easy ones to start with, right? And then you can, from there, refine. I think the other thing that's interesting with power questions is inevitably you have to practice, right? This is just like working out, right? You have to build up a tolerance to be comfortable with the silence. You have to build up a tolerance to be open to this conversation, right? To be a bilateral conversation with a client. And sometimes people are nervous about that. So you have to practice it, right? And I think that's also very important. And one of my clients said, well, I don't feel comfortable asking the questions. And I said, well, that's part of this. You have to start to feel comfortable flexing that muscle, right? And in order to do that, you have to ask the questions, right? So I think it all sort of feeds into each other in the end.
So that actually brings up an interesting question. When someone who is in the power question frame of mind, for lack of a better way to put it, starts off, let's just say an initial sales call, are they are they warning people? Are they prepping the people who they're talking to that they're going to be asking a lot of questions and maybe helping the people that they're talking to maybe get into the right frame of mind and things, or are they just charging forward and just going, full bear with it?
No, I always recommend to put an agenda together where you are letting everyone on the call. And when I say put an agenda together, in your head, have your agenda or have it as part of the meeting invitation, where you will let them know, like, first, section one, or first up, would love to ask some questions about your business and your experience thus far. Second section is I will share our products or service and talk about how it might help benefit you, right? And third is, the follow-up and next steps, right? So I do always recommend that you're putting that agenda together and you're sort of alerting them. And also you need to be a bit, you need to be open and receptive to that conversation. So I always sort of coach folks in saying, like, you may get on the call and it may be, they don't want to have a conversation, right? Like I call it the wet noodle syndrome, right? Like it's like pulling teeth. You're asking these great questions. They're giving you yes or no answers, right? That is an opportunity to say, maybe this isn't a great time for this conversation. It sounds like maybe we're not a right fit, right? Going back to the adding value,
Right.
You do have some control as a salesperson. You are not just, don't have to be a sheep, right? As part of that, like, you can assert some control over that relationship. And I do suggest you do that. And I think also you need to be open that if the conversation goes in a different path, like, even though you set up 3 power questions, like, if they don't relate anymore, like, don't ask those questions, right? You have to kind of
Right.
get where your client's going. But I think the act of doing it and the act of preparing for it helps you, because just like if you're preparing for a test or a quiz or something like that, the more you do it and the more you're practicing it, the better you're going to be, right? So it's just a matter of, again, going back to the discipline part of sales. That should be part of your discipline. As you're doing the research, it should spur questions and it should spur insights that you want to dive deeper into, that then will help you say, hey, I saw on your website this, tell me more about that. And then when it's your turn to sort of maybe share more about your service or product, you can say, and based on our conversation, it sounds like this would help you accomplish X, which we just spoke about, right? Which you just shared with me as your goal for the company a year from now, right? So it helps you sort of make those dots and connects those dots for the client so that they don't have to do it. Because the other thing that I learned working for the Walt Disney Company, as you can imagine, which is where I spent the majority of my career, is everything is with the focus of the client or the guest, right? Which is why power questions is so important, because if somebody asked you after a vacation, how was your vacation? Essentially, it's a snoozer question, I like to say, right? You're like, it was good, right? And then, like, off you go, right?
Yep.
If somebody asked you, what was the best thing you ate on your vacation, Bob?
Yeah.
Different vibe, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm really curious about what you ate on your vacation, or what the best experience was on your vacation, or what your family liked best on the vacation, right? It creates this sort of, wait a minute, well, Lisa really wants to know about that. That's so interesting, because I love to talk, me, Bob, I love to talk about what I ate on vacation, right? So think about how you would feel as if you think you're getting on a sales call and you think you're just going to be listening to a regurgitated sales pitch, versus, wow, somebody just got on a sales call that I've never met and asked me some really great questions and got me thinking even more than I was before, right? That's sort of the magic of the power question.
Yeah, yeah. So, especially getting back to the quote that I just had, this really is about changing the dynamics of relationships between the salesperson and the prospect, or the salesperson and the client, if it's more of an AE type of situation. I mean, it's sounds to me it's like a way to to take control, but I mean, not truly take control, because you're still wanting to potentially sell something, and you can't control who ultimately signs the contract and signs the checks and things like that. But let's get into the value adding part a little bit more, because I think that once you've got control, it's probably easier to add value. Is that a statement that you'd agree with?
Definitely. I mean, I think once you've sort of ascertained and have all that information, all that great information about your prospect or client, you then can add value in ways that maybe you didn't even know you could, right? So let's say that person is like, actually, we're hiring someone on our team for a marketing position. I'm making it up, right? I'm sure you as a salesperson know a ton of marketers, right? So could you add value there, right? I think the act of asking the questions then gives you more fodder to be able to add value at different points in that relationship. And you will never know that unless you ask the questions, right? You would never know that, and you would never connect those dots until you've had that really robust conversation with the client.
Yeah, definitely. So we've been mainly talking about power questions in terms of prospecting. You've already addressed a little bit about someone who is in an account exec, or someone who is already has a book of business. You know, uh, can expand, but how can someone who's not trying to not solve a problem, but to try to quash the um the uh the thought of a problem, like you're doing in the example that you gave before, and just wants to expand a book of business within their current book already, how can power questions help with that?
So I think power questions can help. It really can help anyone, salesperson or not. But for
Mhm.
account managers, AEs, things like that, really formulating power questions to really understand where your current client is sort of in your process, or where your current client might be able to expand the business, right? Really
Mhm.
unearthing and figuring out, okay, what can I ask my client to better understand where we stand as a firm, where where our services stand, or ask a client a question around maybe additional business that we can get from them. So I think that's where sort of an AE can shine, is you're not just servicing the client for today, you're figuring out how your firm or your services or your products can help the client in the future. In order to do that, you need to have a dialogue, and you need to ask some really pointed questions, specifically power questions, to better ascertain that, so that you can then provide that value moving forward. Oftentimes you'll be an AE or an account manager, and then all of a sudden the business goes away, and there was nothing specific like that went wrong, but you didn't sort of or you may not have like headed off a problem that you didn't know was there because you weren't asking the right questions, right? So I think it is important, especially if your role requires you to grow or expand, land and expand within a company, or if your goal is to retain, that quarterly meetings with your client, or once a month, right? Whatever your cadence is, includes some of those really interesting power questions, and ensuring from an industry standpoint that you're capturing some of that industry intel, right? Look what's going on in the world right now with AI, right? Like, I mean, things
Right.
happen very quickly. So peppering your sort of regular cadence meetings with those power questions, I think could be really game changing for an AE or an account manager.
Okay, so here's a question that I had not even thought to ask until you brought it up. So it's your fault, blaming it on you. We do talk a lot about AI. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if you're using AI at all in terms of power question. Are you using AI? And if so, how are you using it?
It's a great question. What's interesting about AI is the prompts that you use need to be power questions. So if I'm prompting ChatGPT or Bard, I'm often prompting it with a power question to try and sort of unearth and peel back the onion to a problem or a question that I'm asking. So I think that's how I use power questions as it relates to AI. I haven't really asked ChatGPT to create any power questions for me.
Okay.
Um, but I am using it maybe to preemptively think about what a client might answer, right? Or an industry problem might sort of be. So I do think it's important, and I do think AI is an extremely important tool as salespeople go forward, because again, I firmly believe that in order to build relationships, you have to be relatable and you have to do your research. And I think ChatGPT and the likes really provide an amazing layer of research that Google or just the internet has not proven to be. I think the other way I've used AI, which is unrelated to power questions, is I will craft emails or I will craft communications with clients, and I will put it into ChatGPT just to say, like, wordsmith this, or make this sound better, or use this tone for it. And I do think, as salespeople, and I think typical salespeople, like, you need to use all the resources available to you, right? So like,
Right.
why
100%.
not use it, right? I don't think it's going to take a salesperson's job specifically.
Yeah.
I think, again, if you're relying on relationships, there's no way that at least right now, right?
Yeah. And let's not think about the future when it comes to that type of thing. I'm dying to know, because I do can definitely see about using power questions and prompts, and how much more powerful the output could be. And I think I'm actually kind of doing that without really knowing that I was doing that. But can you give an example of a power question prompt? How does that sound? You could even trademark that phrase if you want.
Power question prompt. That's a good one. I would say it would include, again, tell me more about X, or give me a comparison between X and Y. So, giving the tool that sort of reference point of you're trying to compare two things, or you're trying to understand something more deeply. So I think the comparison, I have used that one, and that is very interesting. And I think that could be related to compare my product to some other product, or it could even be somehow related in the industry, like compare the culture of X company versus Y company, or something like that. So those would be my two. The tell me more and the comparison prompts have worked very well for me.
Okay. All right, good. So I think we're going to
What prompts are you using, Bob? Can I ask
Oh
a
God.
question?
Mine just get mine get very specific. I've actually got a prompt model that's called CRISP, which is content. And I've got to read off of it just because I do it so intuitively now. People ask me what CRISP stands for, and I'm like, God, I got to think about it. Content, role, inspiration, scope, and prohibitions. I try to work all of those as much as possible into prompts to really get something out of it, like the first time, either that, or I may use like a couple of those letters at first, fully planning on you know planning on asking additional ones a little later on down the road. And I think that probably the most powerful one out of that entire CRISP kind of format is prohibitions, to tell it what not to do.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, but I love ChatGPT. If someone said, "Here's $100,000, play on ChatGPT," I would be the most happiest person in the universe, I
Well,
think.
don't they need a new CEO? Maybe you can apply.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Let's do that. So now let's get into some more general questions about B2B sales. So first of all, talking about biz dev playbooks, what are the key elements and successful ones for sales and biz dev, and how should teams go about creating one?
So I think the most important key to successful playbooks is that they have to be easy to read, easy to follow, and easy to sort of execute. I think I've come across a lot of playbooks where it's almost too detailed, right? And you lose
Yeah.
people very quickly. And
Mhm.
my sort of rule of thumb on that is, if the average person is not going to be able to follow along, then you shouldn't be using it. You should really make it easy to follow along and use, and ensure that it keeps people's attention. I think oftentimes people think more is better, and I firmly believe that that is not true necessarily, right?
Yep.
Because if nobody reads it through the end, or nobody gets through it, or nobody follows it, then guess what? It's not worth it to begin
Right.
with.
Yeah.
So that's typically my rule of thumb with
Yeah.
sales playbooks.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it kind of comes down to one of my kind of golden rules, which is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think that that definitely applies in terms of what you're talking about. Like sometimes they can go into too much depth and have too much breadth, and just not focus in on exactly what it is you're trying to do, which is sales and biz dev.
And I think too, what happens then is everyone's focused on like the process, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
we're not doing the things we need to do, right, to get more meetings, right? Which is really ultimately what we should be doing.
Right.
So, I think it's important, and oftentimes companies want to be so process driven nowadays because of technology, because they have reports, and because of, all that stuff. Yes, definitely use it to make your lives easier and better. But the second it's not making your lives easier, then we should reevaluate, because the real goal is you should be trying to have as many conversations as possible. And that ultimately should be every salesperson's sort of goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So next, let's get into sales presentations a little bit. I've seen, unfortunately, more of my fair share that just suck. I mean, they're bad. You develop presentation blueprints. So how can salespeople and sales orgs transform their presentations from ones that suck to ones that shine?
Great question. I think it goes back to research. I talk a lot about researching
Mhm.
before you ask your questions, researching before you get on the phone. You should be researching even before you give a sales presentation. And here's why. You want to be able to weave throughout your presentation either information to the client that you've gleaned as your research, information the client has shared with you as part of your questions, right? As part of your
Mhm.
questions. Uh, Maybe something happened today that's important for the meeting, right? You can't just use yesterday's presentation if something landed today in the news that's important to the conversation. So I think doing that research and really customizing the deck or the presentation to the client is important. From a content standpoint, I also think, being a Disney alum, storytelling is really important, right? Like nobody wants to
Mhm.
sit there and listen to you drone on about whatever it is you're selling. You
Yeah.
need to make it emotive, and you need to make it exciting and tell a story, right? And
Mhm.
that story could be personal, it could be about the industry, it could be, but you need to weave that into it. And I think junior salespeople, again, they get nervous. So I always recommend practice, right? Like you have to practice. Don't just roll up to the meeting doing no research, never practicing your deck, never checking it, right? And think it's going to go amazing, because guess what? It's not going to go amazing. It's going to go poorly.
Right.
Right. So what does that mean? It means you need to get a buddy. I mean, I used to sort of pair my salespeople together, practice the story, practice what you're going to say, practice the research. And that goes back to your question earlier about the discipline, right? Sales is a
Mhm.
discipline in the sense that you need to do all those things all of the time. And you can't just think, I'm going to wing this and see how it goes, right? Because that could be, you could be losing a great opportunity in that moment. So the discipline of sales, I think, is often what is the hardest, right? It's not hard to get on the phone and be jovial and have a conversation with someone. That's not the hard part. The hard part is getting to that point and making sure when you get on that call, you're really prepared, right? And
Right.
you're ready to add value. So
Mhm. And you're also ready to listen, which a lot of times people just have their agenda, their agendas, and they're not. I mean, because I've been on calls where, quite frankly, I've probably missed some nuggets because I was probably thinking a little far ahead and just and not truly being present. And being present is really key, I think.
totally. But I think that's a function of people are nervous and they don't like silence, because
Yeah.
we're conditioned as a society to not, if it's silent, that's for, I don't know why, but we think that that's bad, when actually that's when things can sort of blossom, right? Like if
Yep.
you just stop talking, which is also hard for salespeople, we tend to be extroverts and generalizing, right? But like, if you have that moment of silence where the client then adds something or there's more to that story, then that's where sort of the beauty of that relationship starts to blossom.
Yep.
And I think if you haven't done it before or you haven't sort of practiced that, that can be, you feel like it's an eternity, right? You feel like that pause is a pregnant pause and it's an eternity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And whenever I hear about uncomfortable pauses and uncomfortable silences, I always go back to that scene in Pulp Fiction. If you know, you know. And but there is truth in that scene too. I mean, it's like it's actually really true what about uncomfortable silences, and then adding what you added, I think is great.
Yeah, totally.
So I always like to loop in my marketing peeps into these conversations. So what advice would you give marketing teams who support salespeople to ensure cohesive and effective approaches to B2B sales? And also, quite frankly, I think to support them with power questions, because I could see where marketing can really help people with developing power questions too.
Mhm. Well, I love my marketing friends, and I think marketers should have their set of power questions that they should be asking the sales team. So
Ooh,
marketers should be coming to the table with their sales team, really trying to dig and again peel back that onion to understand what the objections are, right? What is the either the block that a salesperson is having, or what information is a salesperson getting from a prospect or a client that could help inform the marketer. So I think each sort of department of a company can have their own set of power questions. It's really not just for salespeople, and that will again unlock, I think, some of the things that marketers would need to help them do their jobs better and to really help support the sales team.
and realizing that there's all different types of industries and everything else out there. What's a good example of a power question that marketers can ask salespeople?
Well, you could ask your sales team, what are the top three objections that we're getting with regards when we're on the phone with a client, right? Those objections are exactly what a marketer should be using, right? To kind of flip them on their head to get more leads or to get more traction. Yeah.
And develop content too from like a social selling standpoint. I mean, that's actually one of the things that we recommend is, your top objections, turn that around and make it into content, into an ebook, and put it on a post, and just explode with that. Yeah, absolutely.
But a lot of times marketers don't think of that as a relationship that they should be sort of probing and asking questions. They think that, oh, well, my job is to figure that out, right? Well, no, your job is to collaborate with the sales team. And if they have the answer, like, why not, use that, like you said, exploit your objections to your favor, right?
Right. Yeah. One who could not agree with that more, 100%. So before we wrap up, we were talking a little bit before the show about a subject that's not popular, but we definitely need to address it. So the post-COVID world. So things have changed. I mean, we're not meeting as much as we are before. You and me are on Zoom right now. A lot of questions a lot of meetings rather are happening on Zoom. What are your top sales tips post-COVID?
So my first one, it sounds similar to one that maybe was pre-COVID, but it's ABC, and it's not always be closing, it's always be curious. I think with COVID, obviously you're not building relationships in person. However, going back to research, I think research stems with curiosity. So I am sort of an avid lover of all things, not just in my industry, not just in my client's industry. I am like an avid, I'm curious about a lot of things, and that helps you be sort of a student of the world, right? And when you're on a call with someone, that allows you to have the vocabulary that you need to be able to form a relationship quickly. So always be curious. I think that is even more important now post-COVID, because you have a very small amount of time to create a bond with someone, right? And where you may have been at a conference before and you have 3 nights and dinners and drinks and fun stuff, you have 3 minutes at the beginning of the Zoom to really sort of form that bond. So being curious allows you to sort of be comfortable with all different types of situations, right? And all different types of conversations. So that's number one. The second one is related, is you can't research enough. I used to tell my teams, be like a defense lawyer. You're going to research things, right? So you almost know the answers to the questions before
Right.
you ask them.
Yep.
It always was my pet peeve if I was ever on a sales call and someone would ask me a question that you could easily find on my website, right?
Or your LinkedIn profile. Yep.
Right, or your LinkedIn profile, right? Like, okay, well,
Yep.
why are we here, right? If I'm just going to answer a question that you can find on my LinkedIn profile, I could use this 30 minutes for, a much more successful or solution-based event. So I think, that is also very important. And we're very focused on our phones right now and the quick fix and like doing things quickly, where I think slowing down and really taking your time around crafting those questions, making sure they are very pertinent for your potential client or prospect, and really sort of diving into that is important. And then lastly, I think post-COVID, relationship-based selling, I think, has become even more important. In fact, pre-COVID, I think it was almost going out of favor, if you will. Like it was very much like spray and pray, and like we're just gonna send a lot of emails and hope for the best. And I think,
Oh yeah, hoping tech takes over a little bit more.
I'm sorry.
Hoping tech takes over a little bit more in the process,
Yeah,
and
I think there
getting
was,
away
yes.
of getting away from relationships.
Correct. And I think post-COVID, what I've learned is that you have to be even more adept at that relationship-based selling and adding value. And you can't just rely on somebody saw your brand and now they're reaching out to you, or somebody, got an email and now they're, clamoring to have a 30-minute phone call with you, right? Like that rarely happens. So how do you, again, provide value and really form a relationship with someone so that they want to do business? Maybe not now, maybe not 6 months from now, but you're playing the
Right.
long game. You're playing the long.
Right. Oh my God, yes. I mean, yeah, so many people are concerned about short term, which I mean, that's what sales is. What have you done for me lately? But at the same time, you have to keep focused on the long term too.
Right.
So with that, I always like to wrap these up with, what's one thing someone can do right now to improve whatever their situation is. So I think in this case, we're going to ask, what is one thing someone can do right now to effectively implement power questions within their sales process? The one thing immediately.
I think the one thing is to prepare. So go into your next meeting and have 3 power questions prepared for your client meeting, and really think about how to ask those questions in a way where it allows the client to share more, tell you more, and story tell themselves.
Way to wrap up. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, Lisa, how would they do that?
Great. So LinkedIn is the best place. Lisa Scotto Pomeranning, and I own LMS Growth Consulting. And so happy to be here, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And in case you want to look up the website directly, it's LMS, just like it sounds, Growth Consulting, all one word, no dashes or any kind of weird things like that.com. So lmsgrowthconsulting.com. So Lisa Scotto, founder of sales strategy and business development consulting firm. We just heard it, LMS Growth Consulting. Thank you for joining us today. Really had a great time talking about a whole bunch of different things, but I think really are going to help the audience today.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. This was great.
Good, good. And thank you for streaming this episode of Making Sales Social. So remember, when you're out and about this week, be sure to make your sales social.
Don't miss an episode. Visit socialsaleslink.com/podcast. Leave a review down below. Tell us what you think, what you learned, and what you want to hear from us next. Register for free resources at linkedinlibrary.com. You can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. Visit our website, socialsaleslink.com, for more information.